what would the bombing of Karachi have actually looked like? What weapons would have been used? What kind of defense would have happened? Paint us that picture, because that's something that most people are talking about.
And Shiv, what are the chances that bits of this are going to be cherry-picked, edited out and put without any context?
Oh, they're already done. It's happening. It's happening.
And so right up off the top, in case you plan to do this, we know you're going to try and do this. So we're just calling you out before you even attempt to do that.
Both here and in Pakistan. But Vishnu, you and I are responsible journalists. We will only speak about fact. Vishnu, you've been in a Rafale off an aircraft carrier?
Not off an aircraft carrier.
Okay.
I've flown in fact...
But you've flown over the sea?
Yeah, off the coast of East in France.
Yes, yes.
50 feet of the deck of the Mediterranean in a turn, with the pilot saying we are fully hands-off right now. Warnings beeping in my ears, and I'm looking down, looking right at the sea, thinking this is totally not happening, except it was.
So good to have you back on episode 2 of Control Alt Defence, our brand new defence and military affairs podcast here on NDTV. Vishnu, good to have you back.
Great to be here.
It seems like episode 1 was only yesterday. We're still in a time of war, and I want to start, Vishnu, by obviously acknowledging the incredible response that episode 1 has gotten.
And we are deeply, deeply thankful for our viewers for sort of coming back with us with incredible suggestions and advice and all sorts of things. Good, bad and ugly, we take it all.
Most of it good, overwhelmingly. And I think there's a bar that has been set now as we begin to start episode 2.
Absolutely.
And this is actually, I wanted to start by saying that this is one of the biggest recommendations that we got. So I want to tell all of our listeners and viewers that we are listening to every word that they are saying. So if you have suggestions in terms of what you want us to talk about, what you want us to focus a specific episode on, we're absolutely listening. And Vishnu, I should also tell our viewers that this is actually something we were planning anyway. So it's good to see everyone's aligned.
No, absolutely. We were planning to do this for a very long time, and this isn't going away anywhere, this podcast. And defense is such a huge area. We can cover so much. So our viewers really do guide us in that sense. And we welcome those views. And the encouragement has been overwhelming. I don't think I've received as much encouragement on any single program which I've done. This is just my second podcast, but it's been absolutely incredible.
And as you can see, Vishnu and I are very, very excited about the feedback and the response. But we also do acknowledge that this podcast comes out at a very serious time for the country. And we are happy to be doing our bit to navigate this whole fog of war by ourselves and help others perhaps do a little bit in understanding what's going on.
And Shiv, what are the chances that bits of this are going to be cherry-picked, edited out and put without any context?
Oh, they're already done. It's happening. It's happening.
And so right up off the top, in case you plan to do this, we know you're going to try and do this. So we're just calling you out before you even attempt to do that.
Both here and in Pakistan. So our first episode, I'm sure all of you have already seen it if you're tuning in now, but please go and watch the first episode if you haven't. We focused on the weapons that we used in Operation Sindoor, missiles, drones, munitions, etc. Today we're going to talk about something that has, well, in a manner of speaking, been beneath the surface, out at sea. Very little has been spoken about it. There have been 2 briefings by the armed forces which have acknowledged the role of the Indian Navy. It was also the subject of a large amount of exaggeration and misinformation. Of course, NDTV was not part of that. But Vishnu, the Indian Navy. Okay. Something that's very close to your heart, something that's very close to my heart. We also know that when the Indian Navy gets involved, the balloon has really, really gone up. This time, they were there, they were deployed. So your opening reading of what we know so far about what the Indian Navy did in Operation Sindoor.
The Indian Navy had an absolutely critical role as far as this particular operation is concerned. The operation, of course, is not over. And I would suspect that many of our frontline naval assets are still deployed way out there. But between the Makran coast of Pakistan and going further east, the Indian Navy, led by a carrier battle group, primarily of the aircraft carrier INS Vikrant, and her defensive component of destroyers and frigates, ensured that there were no Pakistani aircraft which had free flight military aircraft between the west and the east of Pakistan, which meant that military assets which Pakistan may have wanted to have deployed against us in the air battle, right, over the international border and the line of control, whatever was there is what we engaged. but there were certain assets out at sea, our MiG-29Ks of our aircraft carrier, which kept other Pakistani assets busy. So there was a theatre which the Indian Navy occupied with incredibly high technology platforms and a working aircraft carrier.
And an Indian-built aircraft carrier.
And at least 16 odd MiG-29Ks operating over there under a defensive shield.
So, I want to simplify this even further, because the both of us can paint a visible picture of what this must have looked like. The sea is an enormous space, Vishnu. It's tempting to look at it as a sort of visible canvas where you can see everything, but you can see nothing at sea. And a carrier battle group with INS Vikrant, which, as Vishnu just said, is an indigenous, homegrown aircraft carrier built entirely here in India, with its elements, the parts of its elements, which, and I want you to add to this, Vishnu, are warships of different kinds. I'm assuming destroyers, frigates, submarines, helicopters, obviously the aircraft that are there on the aircraft carrier as well. How big is a carrier battle group in terms of the kind of area that it spans and what it influences?
An Indian carrier battle group is the most dominating aspect of surface warfare which the Indian Navy is in a position to conduct. It's led by one, if not two, aircraft carriers, the Vikrant and the Vikramaditya. Both of them operate the MiG-29K aircraft. The MiG-29K operates, off the deck of these ships. It's got fairly long-range air-to-air missiles, the R-77 series. They've got excellent modern radars, a high level of data linking, and I'm going to explain all of this. So that sort of forms the outer periphery. That ensures that there is integral air or integral air defense of the entire fleet. But that carrier, if there's one or two, would be defended by at least 2 to 4 either Visakhapatnam or Kolkata class destroyers.
Again, Indian built.
There is nothing here, by and large, which I'm talking about, which is built outside.
That's incredible.
It is incredible.
Yeah, we will come back to that point.
We'll come to that point. Each of these radars, each of these warships is equipped with similar radars, the MF Star, which is an Israeli-designed radar. These are among the most advanced, maritime surveillance, tracking, detection and fire control, if required, radars anywhere in the world. They've got backup radars as well, which provide long-range search. So for several hundred square kilometers of the sea around the aircraft carrier, there is a sanitized zone. That sanitized zone exists not just because of the MiG-29K aircraft, but because of the sensors which exist on all of these ships. We've got a brand new class of frigate out there. Again, MF Star equipped radar. It's got an Indra Lanza radar, which is its secondary radar. Together, you've got incredible capability over there. You've got surface-to-air missiles which are protecting the fleet, integral to the ships themselves, the outer periphery, defended by the MiG-29Ks that I spoke about, and then, of course, a tiered system of defense. There is nothing that gets in several hundred square kilometers of that
layered
without the Indian Navy knowing and then deciding what they want to do with it.
So Vishnu, there were two main takeaways. There are actually 10 that I've distilled from the two comments that the Director General of Naval Operations said in those two briefings which you attended as well. One of them, the main salient point was that, which became, of course, a headline for the Navy, was that the Indian Navy had deployed. It was operationally deployed in the North Arabian Sea and had created the kind of deployment that had caged in the Pakistan Navy either to harbour in Karachi and elsewhere or very close to port. Not my words, the words of the Director General of Naval Operations. You've touched upon how this would have been made possible, obviously because of the offensive threat posture of the Indian Navy. But break it down and simplify that further. What would this have meant? What was the threat to the Pakistan Navy that they couldn't leave port?
For starters, a couple of the Pakistan Navy submarines were already in dry dock. They are getting refurbished, as it were. So those submarines were out of action. They also operate some fairly advanced Scorpion-class submarines. Perhaps they may have been, not Scorpion, I should say. They operate Augusta-class 90B class submarines. We operate the Scorpion. All 6 of our Scorpion submarines are now entirely operational. So they'll be looking out for those Pakistani Navy submarines in addition to other assets. But the firepower that the Indian Navy has, each of the primary surface combatants is equipped with the BrahMos missile. Depending on the variant of the BrahMos missile, you're looking at a range of at least 300 kilometers. These can destroy ports, Karachi harbour if it had to, but that means you go up the matrix of warfare, and that's something which our government chose not to do at this stage. But in terms of the threat that poses for Pakistani warships as well, and remember the number of warships they actually have is a fraction of what we operate. The capabilities that their warships bring on the deck in terms of offensive and defensive firepower is a fraction of what the Indian Navy actually possesses. It basically meant that the Pakistani Navy was safer by and large in port, in dock, than out at sea confronting us. I think this is an important point we need to dwell on. While the Indian Air Force and the Pakistan Air Force in some senses are near peers in some of the technology which they operate, AESA radars, for example,
comes in.
Long-range air-to-air missiles, the Navy, it's not a competition. In terms of technology, in terms of quantity, in terms of the missile systems, offensive and defensive, and of course aircraft carriers, not to mention brand new submarines, some just a few months old at the time of commissioning, which transforms the capabilities of the Indian Navy, making it a completely different class from the Pakistan.
You know, the bombing of Karachi harbour is something that is part of our history, Vishnu. 1971 it actually happened. This time we know for a fact, and I remember when the media was going crazy with all kinds of misinformation about Karachi already being bombed. You and I were the only journalists. We were both live on air during that time, during Operation Sindoor, reporting the facts, and we were validated when the Indian Navy actually came on the record and said we were fully primed and ready. The words that they used were, they were ready to strike if there had been another provocation and an escalation.
Absolutely.
And who knows till where that could have gone. But I want you to paint that picture for us, naming the kinds of weapons that we must have had. You've already named the BrahMos.
Yeah, sure.
You've talked about the submarines, the frigates and the destroyers that we had there, the Vikrant as well. What would the bombing of Karachi have actually looked like? What weapons would have been used? What kind of defense would have happened? Paint us that picture, because that's something that most people are talking about.
Well, I would like to say, with a word of caution, that if we actually went ahead and did offensive operations on Karachi, the Pakistanis would have tried to have retaliated. We've got our own ports, we've got a megapolis like Mumbai as well.
Yes.
So we would need to take all of those factors into consideration. The matrix is very high. When you in terms of engaging a target like a city through a maritime strike, a city like Karachi, it would be pretty much at the apex level
That's
of military.
War.
I mean, it's war way beyond what we've seen so far. Many still use the word war in terms of the context of the limited sort of clashes which we've seen this time around. But India would set up an attack on Karachi using overwhelming air superiority. If we could achieve that, we'd use potentially our aircraft carriers. There would be a mass use of the Rampage missile, which is also deployable on the MiG-29K of the Indian Navy. There'd be the BrahMos, which is fired off our warships as well. There'd be P-8 aircraft, which would actually also offer a great deal of assistance in terms of potentially detecting Pakistani submarines and Pakistani ships out at sea. We'd also be using unmanned aircraft, long-range ones, whether they're made by, for example, General Atomics has platforms which operate out there. A limited number would be in the future, acquiring many more of the Sea Guardian type, which would provide long-range sustained reconnaissance over what is taking place. All of our assets would be incredibly data linked, again through the use primarily of the MF Star radar. They would all have integral surface-to-air missiles, because let's face it, if we shoot, the Pakistanis would shoot right back. What would the Pakistanis use? They'd potentially use their Babur cruise missile. So we would need to defend against that. And that's where the combination of the MF Star radar and the Barak 8 or the MR-SAM radar, MR-SAM missile, which we operate, would be so critical. The Barak 8 MR-SAM is absolutely critical for the Indian Navy's operations. It has a robust range out to 70-80 odd kilometers. The sensors that we are working to enhance the range of that. Given the technology in the radar itself, which is the Israeli MF Star, there is the possibility of intercepting ballistic missiles which come the way of the fleet as well.
Right.
If Pakistan were to
it can
strike
hit missiles as well.
Ballistic missiles, no less than that. Not just incoming subsonic anti-ship missiles, but ballistic missiles. The trick, however, and no one really knows how this works or whether it's possible, is anti-ship missile operated by the Pakistanis, fired off one of their new Chinese-built frigates, comes in at Mach 3, potentially at a speed faster than our own BrahMos. Do we have the ability of reliably intercepting that? That's what it would have boiled down to. And which is why targeting those assets, right? using platforms
like spiraling escalation.
That had to be done first.
Yeah. You know, you talked about something that was going to be in my next question, Vishnu, which is we've got a pair of Sea Guardian drones on lease, which operate, in the southern part of the country. The P8Is are platforms which the Indian Navy absolutely loves. They've been used, across land operations, land campaigns as well. I think safe to presume that they must have been in the picture as well, doing some form of work, keeping their eyes on the battle space.
The Indian Navy has, and I would add even the Indian Coast Guard, though their role is somewhat different, has incredibly networked, sensor-specific resources out at sea and in the air all the time. And let's see how it begins. We've got several P8s with the Indian Navy. Each P8 talks to the other P8s. They collect their data, whether it is extremely long-range reconnaissance radars which track the movement of ships out at sea. They've got magnetic anomaly detectors which can detect submarines out there. They can deploy sonobuoys as well to try and get the acoustic signature of submarines. All of the data which a single platform collects is data linked not just with other P8s, it is data linked with the Sea Guardians as well, or variants of the Predator, the two of which we operate right now. It goes back to the ships as well. So in the case, for example, what we were talking about in our last episode of the Indian Air Force having an integrated command, IACCS, or the integrated command and control system, the Navy has a full picture of what the air threats are, the surface threats are, and the subsurface threats are. And I dare say that probably links into IACCS as well at some level. So
they're sharing information.
So if, for example, there is a headquarters, in fact there is, of the IACCS, our military planners over there know everything.
The Army, the Air Force even put out a picture of it.
Yeah, that's right.
With everyone in a mask.
When that works, and no one will tell us if that's 100% operational, it would certainly include the naval sort of picture, the combat picture as it were.
Okay, so now that we've looked at the salient points of what the Indian Navy's operations looked like, they were definitely deployed. I want to quickly read out, Vishnu, just the 10 things that the DG Naval Operations said, and then we'll pick up 2 or 3 of these and go into a little bit more detail. Indian Navy operates as a fully networked multi-domain force with persistent surveillance and extended range targeting that we've covered. Fleet air defense provides layered protection against drones, missiles, fighters and surveillance aircraft, which is something you touched upon just now. The carrier battle group with MiG-29Ks and airborne early warning helicopters created a no-approach zone several hundred kilometers wide. Obviously, we're not talking about specifics of where these ships were deployed or, where, how far they were
from I should say great minds think alike, because I had actually forgotten to read a statement when I came into this.
So,
but it seems I've got the same points that...
But our avid listeners and, the discerning will be able to pick out some of the data without us having to actually say those things. Post Pahalgam, the Navy validated anti-missile and anti-aircraft capabilities in a complex threat environment. Excellent point that you just made. Carrier battle group operated uncontested, forcing Pakistan air assets to remain near the Makran coast, unable to threaten maritime space. Now, this is something that I've been getting a lot of questions about, and you would know this better, Vishnu, which is bottled up is the word, the phrase that the DG Naval Operations used. We bottled up their fighters and pinned them down to the Makran coast.
Yes.
What aircraft were these that were pinned down over there? Because on Control ALT Defence, we assume that people will want to know specifics. What were these aircraft? What would they have been trying to do? And how did the Indian Navy do these with MiG-29Ks?
Well, there would be either F-16s or there would be Mirage 5 aircraft potentially equipped with anti-ship missiles. Whether it's the Exocet or the Harpoon, I don't remember offhand right now, but certainly some of those weapons would be deployed by the Pakistanis to carry out or attempt to carry out a missile run and target our ships. So if you've got a large number of those kept at bay because you've got constant caps or combat air patrols being flown by MiG-29s, I would suggest that we would possibly have had even more than 16 MiG-29Ks deployed on Vikrant during these operations, working day in and day out. Operating and landing on our aircraft carrier, which is still relatively small, at night, it's nothing easy. It's extremely difficult. Working together with COMOV aerial airborne warning radar systems, which sort of give them even further and more enhanced situational awareness of where they are, where incoming threats are. That's what they would be doing, and the Pakistanis would have picked up our radars. They would have known exactly what we were doing. They would have known the proximity of our fleet to the Pakistani coastline, and they would have had assets, air assets, which were in position to engage that if it boiled down to it. But the fact is then, therefore, those air assets were pinned.
Yeah.
They were kept occupied while the air battle, which did take place, was taking place with the remaining assets facing off against the Indian Air Force.
Okay, very interesting, because when the Director General of Naval Operations said they'd caged in the Pakistan Navy to the harbour and near port and they'd bottled up these fighters, my mind just went to a map showing all these assets just kind of lining their coast and not really leaving, which is, if you really think about it, incredible. Yeah. So it's not like the Indian Navy was sitting this one out, which a lot of people might think, because everything else was so kinetic and visible. And
lots of exercises before the strikes went down. I mean, if you remember what Damien Simon put out over there, the NOTAMs, the Notice to Airmen and Sailors, all over the place. There were Pakistani exercises, there were Indian exercises. I don't remember ever having seen exercise versus exercise with the gap between fleets being as small as it was in terms of nautical miles. In some cases, it was absolutely nothing. They would have fired off missiles. We certainly did, and we put out public releases saying, look, we fired BrahMos, or we fired, I'm not sure whether we fired Barak as well, presumably we did. But it was to test the defenses. These were warships fully armed and ready, to the hilt they were armed, and they were ready to go to war. They were deployed to go to war. That it didn't ultimately take place is, I mean, it's good that we aren't in that situation. This reality would have been very different. But that's what they had gone out for. They tested their weaponry. Pakistan had a NOTAM, we had a counter NOTAM. Notice to airmen, notice to airmen. We are going to fire weapons in this area, so not a problem. We'll be firing our own weapons. And let's see who can sustain these for a longer period of time.
And as Damien said, it seemed like many of these NOTAMs were also sort of amplifying where those vulnerable points were and where those vital assets were, which is interesting, because in a situation where things can spiral out of control, every single one of these NOTAMs are really data points. But someone said something very interesting to me in a forward area when I was visiting Kupwara. Obviously, I won't say who or from what service, but they said Navy ne kamal kar diya hai. And this was...
That's interesting.
And this was, Vishnu, this was, a day into Operation Sindoor. Now, this got me thinking because remember, we were in the middle of the fog of war. And we'd seen a huge amount of fake news, misinformation, exaggerations in the media. So I was wondering what that meant, and this person wouldn't tell me what that meant. And it later kind of maybe dawned on me that the Navy was putting a huge amount of pressure on the Pakistan military from the coast, which is what you were talking about right now. But I want to, since you've covered both aspects of it very closely, I want your reading of that. Influence of maritime pressure on the land battle. Would there have been some kind of a correlation?
100%. As I mentioned, if the Pakistan Navy is not allowed to sail, if you've got the pressure of a huge Indian fleet deployed just off the coast of Pakistan, and if there was a decision to cut off Karachi and their main harbours, prevent supplies from going in, that would be the next level, right? We didn't get into a maritime blockade of economic resources going into Pakistan. That again would have been an immediate provocation, which would have potentially brought Pakistan, to its knees in a finite period of time. But then there is a danger of it spiraling out of control. That didn't take place. But were our assets in a place to do that? Yes. How long could it have been sustained? That needs to be looked at. Would there have been further international or certain international pressure saying, look, don't go down that road. Let's sort of ease off on the tensions, that perhaps that message internationally would have come through stronger. But all I'm trying to say is, technology-wise and ability-wise, all our assets were in place. When we talk, Shiv, and maybe we can segue this conversation into Made in India warships, and you'd started, this conversation with that. When the Indian Navy buys warships, right, it says it buys warships to an Indian Navy specification, which is given to organizations, the naval shipbuilders, and we had Garden Reach, Mazgaon Docks, and other shipbuilders, to a naval specification made in many cases by naval designers to a futuristic naval requirement. So it's not like you're buying something off the shelf, which is a generic brand of warship or maritime asset, which you then sort of use for your own requirements. Instead, you're making something exactly the way you wanted. So if you look at the Visakhapatnam class, which is an upgrade of the Kolkata class earlier on, there are modifications to the design which they feel is necessary. They've got enhanced sensors, they've got a better integrated systems which run the entire ship. The way the propulsion mechanism inside is set up, it's better, it's superior. The way they've quietened the ship even further, the way they've upgraded
much stealthier than the earlier ones.
The way they've upgraded the electronic warfare suites as well, all done at home. Now, is every component of the ship Indian? No, not quite. But there is something to be said about not reinventing the wheel.
Yeah.
So the engines, the primary propulsion are Ukrainian gas turbines. And that is a consistency. We've had, yes, that's right, Ukrainian gas turbines, ladies and gentlemen, in case.
And there's a story there as well.
There's one heck of a story that may be a full other episode.
Yeah.
Zoria gas turbines. They are the primary propulsion for the Delhi class, for the Vishakhapatnam class and the Kolkata class. Excellent engines, instantaneous bursts of power, taking these ships up to about 30 knots plus. The fact that we've been able to integrate them successfully, the fact that we've been able to integrate Israeli missiles, Israeli sensors to an overall Indian architecture. The hull is Indian, various components of the move are Indian as well. Everything else is Indian. We've got a lot of the display systems which are Indian, any number of the electronic warfare systems which are Indian as well. We've got Dhruv helicopters which operate
Basically,
off
we've
those
got
as
a proven shell which we can keep improving.
The AK-630 close-in defense gun is made in India. The Barak 8 missile is made in India right now. The 76mm main gun is made in India as well, an Auto Milara gun.
By BEL, yes.
That's right. So, the indigenous component is huge, well above 70%. I forget what the number is off the top of my head, but that's only going up. And then we see an evolution of that. The Shivalik class, which is an evolution of the predecessor, the class of frigate the Nilgiri class, which is a predecessor, which is a successor of the Shivalik class, which had come on earlier on. The Nilgiri class is absolutely incredible. It's got a new design, somewhat a new profile, new sensors. It is absolutely state of the art, designed for the Indian Navy by the Indian Navy.
So the amazing thing about the Indian Navy, of course, and I'm sure the layers, more and more layers of what you're talking about will come forward, is that the Navy per force has to be visionary. Because when they're ordering equipment, they're ordering it not for them, but for the next generation of sailors and officers and the next war. So they really do have to look into the future in terms of capability. So it's incredible. You and I have spent our entire careers tracking the INS Vikrant, Vishnu. And I promise our viewers that we will be dedicating a whole separate episode to aircraft carriers, because there's quite a bit of development on that front.
There's going to be Rafales on that ship in a couple of years from now. Think about it. The Vikrant is going to have Rafales on it. It already has the Barak 8 missile. It's got MF Star radars.
Vishnu, you've been in a Rafale off an aircraft carrier?
Not off an aircraft carrier. I've flown in fact.
But you've flown over the sea?
Yeah, off the coast of Istres in France. 50 feet of the deck of the Mediterranean in a turn, with the pilot saying, "We are fully hands off right now." Warnings beeping in my ears, and I'm looking down, looking right at the sea, thinking, this is totally not happening, except it was. In fact, we'll bring a video of that into this podcast.
I'm clear with that. And the system tells me to go to attack. Okay. I'll stay autopilot because we are very low, and the autopilot is much safer than me, even if I'm a test pilot. Not that bad, huh?
Oh, it's amazing.
You were the first Indian journalist to have flown on the Rafale.
This was way back in 2011, if I'm not mistaken, is when the Rafale flight happened. So
we flew with the same pilot, I think, 3D, right?
Yes, we did. So, so Vishnu's flown in many more fighters than I have, but yes, the Rafale is something that we definitely have in common. But Vishnu, 3 more questions, we can go on and on about the Navy, but 3 questions that I have to put in because our viewers and listeners wanted these questions. The first question I will ask is on submarines. You did touch upon it, but let's go a little deeper, as it were. What kind of role would our submarines have played in this whole hostile posture?
We've got 18 submarines. The Pakistan Navy has 8, but those 18 submarines include, I think they include the Arihant class, which is a ballistic missile submarine. Are we going to be talking about that?
I will ask you separately about those. Let's talk about just the conventional ones first.
So there's the Calvary class, the Kilo class, which we have. The Calvary class is, of course, the Scorpions as well. We've got the Kilo class. We've got the Type 1500 class, the HDW class submarines, which have been upgraded substantially. Pakistan operates the Agosta 90B, which is an excellent submarine, same French designer. They've got the older Agosta 70, which I think the first one was acquired in 1979 or so. But in a battle between conventional submarines, between, let's say, an Agosta 90B, in at least one of which has been built in Pakistan, I think two have been built manufactured in Pakistan, and the Scorpene would likely come out on top because it is a generation ahead. Right. They've got a far more advanced combat management system. They've got new torpedoes on their way. There's been that huge problem with getting torpedoes for them because the Italian company which was manufacturing the Black Shark torpedo was blacklisted at a certain stage. But I think they've got a workaround over there, and they're progressively looking to upgrade as well. All in all, these are a new generation of submarines. So in the waters of the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal, they would be engaged in operations. One quick word about submarine operations. Given the salinity levels in the Indian Ocean, certainly off our coast, both in the Arabian Sea and in the Bay of Bengal, submarine operations are actually extremely difficult. Given the variable temperature, the thermal differential, the fact just being able to detect submarines is one heck of a skill, which is why you use not only submarines and other surface assets to do that. You use that P8. I keep coming back to the P8. That is a gold standard. It is the world's most advanced maritime reconnaissance aircraft. It's designed to find submarines. There would be submarine battles. The Pakistanis operate the Atlantic as well. They've got a couple of American Orions as well, maritime reconnaissance
which
aircraft.
is what they'd first offered us.
That's right.
Before the P8s.
Very good aircraft, very skilled crew as well. Of course, one was shot down over Bhuj many years back, 1999, shortly after the Kargil War. But that's another story.
Yeah, that was an Atlantic, right?
That was an Atlantic which was shot down. I was there the day after that.
You were there in that helicopter which had a Stinger come at it?
Yeah, it was either a Stinger or a Swedish surface-to-air missile got out of that. But let's come right back to the point. Submarines, very, very important. And of course, destroyers, we have 13. Pakistan doesn't have any. Frigates, we've got 14. They've got 9. Corvettes, they've got 9. We've got 18. They've got a couple of new-build submarines, new-build warships. There is a Turkish-designed corvette. It's called the Milgem class. The Pakistanis call it, I believe, the Babur class. It's about 4,000 odd tons, perhaps a little less than that. Extremely stealthy by way of its design. It's got modern surface-to-air missile systems. They're integrating that with Chinese CM302. Or CM802, depending on the, in fact, class missiles. These are, fairly advanced anti-ship missiles which they operate. They've got the Tugril class, which is the Type 54, which is the primary Chinese surface combatant in any case, right? So they're growing, but the numbers aren't strong.
So it's not neck and neck if we get down to a bean count, which we are always tempted to do between our militaries. Now about the Arihant and the Arigat. Okay, this is obviously
what's going to get us into a lot of trouble.
A sensitive topic, but Vishnu, you and I are responsible journalists. We will only speak about facts, and obviously we will not speak about anything.
The moment we say we are responsible, that's our free pass, right? Since we are responsible, we can't get in trouble.
And Vishnu and I also have no idea what where these submarines are or what role they may have played, but we are still going to speculate about the fact that India almost went to war with Pakistan. There were military attacks inside Pakistan. These are facts that are undisputed, Vishnu. Pakistan is a nuclear-armed country. We are a nuclear-armed country. It is reasonable to presume that had things escalated way beyond where it finally did stop, it's possible that there could have been a nuclear exchange. I'm talking in theory. Now, obviously, in India's nuclear arsenal, the sea leg of our arsenal consists of what we know to be 2 submarines. The INS
There's
Arihant.
a third one, Aridhaman, as well, which is now in the water, I believe. So that's going to be...
So again, these are submarines that are basically deployed to be ready at all times to do the unthinkable.
Go out on deterrence patrols.
So that would have been the case this time as well?
I think there's every reason to believe that at least 1, if not 2 of those frontline assets of India would be deployed somewhere in the Arabian Sea. However, their primary role, as I understand it, is actually against China. They operate and they are positioned on our eastern seaboard because the waters of the Bay of Bengal, become deep very, very quickly as you get off the harbour. So positioning them over there, remember with ballistic missile submarines, given the topography, the lay of the land, the depth of the sea and the conditions in the Bay of Bengal, you don't need to necessarily sail very far. You're in relatively secure waters. You hover for as long as you need to. You get to a particular depth if you're required to, and God forbid if you get that signal through very low frequency,
that crimson tide signal,
and various forms of frequencies designed to give you messages which you then get into that crimson tide scenario. You sort of see if that message is real, and you hope that that it's a test and it's not the real thing. Then you can fire. But given the ranges of the missiles and the fact that you may not necessarily have wanted to fire missiles over
the mainland,
the land, our main landmass, one of those at least may well have been deployed, but this is entirely speculation.
Yeah, this is speculative. Absolutely.
And it may not, we don't know what the state of the submarines was, were they actually battle-worthy at that stage, because these are factors which we need to take into account.
These aren't even war assets. These are strategic assets. They're deterrent assets. But
one among many.
It's good to acknowledge that our nuclear command, our strategic forces command, would have had a role. It's obviously unspoken. There was no representation in any of these briefings, and that's the way it should be. But this is a question that a lot of people have. Last question on this episode, Vishnu, is on the China factor. A near war scenario or an almost war scenario as far as Pakistan is concerned, the huge amount of pressure that the Indian Navy putting on Pakistan, harbour assets, coastal assets, which have a direct bearing on China. What the Indian Navy would have done in the North Arabian Sea would have possibly, worried or triggered China perhaps more than even what the air and the land battle actually did. Would there have been movements on the Chinese side, and how would the Indian Navy have been keeping tabs? Because again, sometimes it's tempting
movement
to
on
think
the Turkish side. As you know, there was one frigate of theirs which actually came in, or one warship of theirs which came into Pakistan while there was a great deal of tension.
Correct. So the Indian Navy would obviously have been looking north in the Arabian Sea, but
they would have been
much of it
west.
would have been looking west and south.
West, because remember Djibouti.
Yeah.
The first overseas Chinese military base is in Djibouti,
Yeah, they've got an outpost there, big one.
In fact, that was one of our biggest stories, where we outed the first satellite imagery of that a few years back, where for the first time there was
we'll put that picture out as well.
and where we've seen frontline Chinese warships deployed. The Chinese keep coming into the waters of the Indian Ocean. They do that every year because they apparently need warships and Type 52D destroyers to take out people operating or pirates operating off the coast of Somalia, which everybody knows is ludicrous, right? So they can call them anti-piracy missions, but I think it is, relatively the first stages of what will be a massive Chinese presence including potential carrier battle groups of the Chinese. It's just a matter of time. I was speaking quite a few years back to the US Pacific Forces commander who would come across to India, who said it's just a matter of time before the Chinese deploy carrier battle groups into the Indian Ocean. The fact is that they've got assets where they can base these submarines, they can base their fleets, whether it's in Djibouti or in Pakistan or perhaps elsewhere as well. But we've got our allies as well. We've got the Americans heavily deployed in the Indian Ocean region. We've got our European allies like the United Kingdom and France, extremely robust. We exercise very heavily with them. We've got the Japanese who come into our waters for military exercises, the Australians as well. But that's a different scenario in war. But I think it is certainly something that we need to keep in mind. Was there a Chinese fast attack boat, a nuclear attack class submarine in the waters of the Indian Ocean, keeping an eye on whatever was taking place?
Will we ever know? Will we ever know? It's difficult.
Unless the Indian Navy actually says that they want to talk about it, they won't. But it is obviously a concern because they do have a reasonable number of fast attack boats, nuclear powered. Different classes now, some of them fairly advanced. And so if those do end up being deployed for prolonged deployments in the Indian Ocean, that's something we need to factor in and are factoring in.
Well, the Indian Navy is called the Navy is called the silent service for a reason, but that was fascinating, Vishnu. And I hope we answered most of the questions that all of our viewers and listeners have had as we got into this topic. I think an overwhelming number of you had wanted us to talk about the Indian Navy because there was just this overwhelming focus on the Air Force and the Army, and rightfully so, because that's where all the kinetic stuff was taking place. Vishnu is just back, if you haven't already seen, from the line of control where much of that very, very aggressive land battle was taking place. But thank you for watching episode 2 of Control Alt Defence. We're very happy. We're still just getting started. So please keep the feedback coming in, and we promise that we will never stop. Thanks for watching.